Hello, welcome to the SDGs and International Law, Opportunities and Gaps in Protection of Rights of Women and Girls in the Digital Space. I'm Nikki Kando-Carrera, I'm going to be your chair for today. Today we have an amazing lineup of speakers and panelists focusing on securing the rights of women and girls in digital space. So I'm sure you'll be keen to engage. To ensure a smooth process, participants will be muted, but you'll be able to engage through the Q&A function. Your questions will be monitored throughout the 75-minute call, and some will be responded to in real time as we go along. We've allocated 20 minutes towards the end of the session where the panelists will respond to any remaining questions and comments. And if we don't manage to get through all the questions, because you're very, very keen, we'll reach out to you and respond by email as soon as we can. This event is responding to the high-level political forum theme, Building Back Better from COVID-19, while advancing the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. There is no doubt that COVID has accelerated us into the world and into the digital age, and this has brought tremendous opportunities, but also some really real challenges. We've learned how to conduct business online, just as we are here today, and we can engage and share ideas regardless of our location. We reduce travel, which is great for the environment, and we can access fountains of information. But we also find ourselves working, trading, socializing, and sharing information and data in a vast, globalized, multi-jurisdictional digital space with very limited regulations, where the law that protects us in the real world, as it were, may no longer be fit for purpose, and our rights could be under threat. In this context, this event focuses on the need for universal digital rights, with experts drawn from governments, the UN and civil society. They will discuss the opportunities presented by the SDGs and international law, such as CEDAW, to secure the rights of women and girls in this digital space. They will also consider any gaps in protection and how a global commitment to universal digital rights may help us to address these gaps and contribute to the achievement of sustainable development goals. We are very grateful for the sponsorship of the Australian government and the support of the Finnish government and the opportunity afforded to us by the UN High-Level Political Forum to hold this debate. So with no further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to invite Her Excellency Li Andersson, the Minister of Education of Finland, to open this session. Li Andersson was appointed the Minister of Education in 2019. She's been an MP in the Finnish Parliament since 2015 and is currently serving her second term. Before this, and throughout her political career indeed, she has held numerous responsibilities in civil society organisations and in trade unions. And she has been a steady advocate for human rights, equality, civil society, as well as social and ecological sustainability. Welcome, dear Minister, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear friends. Thank you firstly for inviting me to this very timely discussion. And I'm especially honored to open this event as Equality Now has received the International Gender Equality Prize in 2019. This prize is awarded by Finland to an actor for advancing gender equality in a globally significant way. The rights of women and girls online are just as important as they are offline. When regulating the digital space, questions on equity and gender equality must be carefully addressed. During the pandemic, life increasingly switched to a digital format, and simultaneously online gender-based violence also has increased. Bridging the gender-digital divide and ensuring safe digital spaces for everyone is more critical than ever. Dear friends, Finland is a co-lead of an action coalition on technology and innovations in the global generation equality process coordinated by UN Women. In this work, preventing and eliminating online gender-based violence and harassment is a priority for Finland. Online harassment hinders the full and equal participation of women and girls in public life. For example, we know that people are less willing to become elected officials or even enter politics due to hate speech. According to a survey that was done by Plan International Finland, more than 40% of girls and young women in Finland have faced hate speech and harassment online. As a result, a third of those girls have reduced expressing their views online. So we clearly see that online harassment has severe consequences also for a well-functioning democracy and for freedom of speech. Special attention must be paid to women and girls facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, for example, due to disability. In Finland, we are taking concrete measures to ensure that our national legislation and policies on the prevention of gender-based violence also apply to online environments. Dear friends, gender equality is essential not only when using technology, but also in designing it. We need technology that is not just gender sensitive, but gender transformative. That is, solutions that have an impact on power dynamics, structures, and social norms, maintaining gender inequalities. To have a more versatile pool of technology developers, Finland is committed to bridging the gender gap in STEM education and employment. This requires cross-sectoral approach, combining education, employment, and youth policies. And we are also strengthening gender equality planning in teachers' education and in the work of study counselors. We also have a national network of universities with a mission to find innovative ways to boost science education and increase the interest of children and youth, especially of girls, in mathematics, science, and technology. Dear friends, in Finland, we also believe that media literacy is one of the most important competences in the digital age. It is key in combating dis and misinformation and hate speech, and helps us make decisions based on scientific evidence. It is pivotal for global citizenship, for democracy, and for critical thinking. That is why media literacy has been promoted in formal education in Finland for decades. And today it is mainstreamed as a transversal competence in our national core curricula at all levels of education, from early childhood to upper secondary education. To conclude, digitalization has the potential to support the fulfillment of human rights for all, including for those in the most vulnerable situations. It can, when used well, strengthen the right to participation and access to education, to information, and to services. And that's why we must strengthen the digital competences of people of all ages. I wish you a fruitful discussion, and I look forward to strengthen our collective efforts to strengthen gender equality in digital spaces. Finland is firmly committed to advancing gender equality, both nationally and internationally. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister Andersson. I couldn't agree more that we need the same gender equality protections and opportunities online as we have offline. We thank you and your government for your commitment to this end. Let me move now to introduce you to our panelists who talk more about this in depth. Firstly, we have Shilpa Polela, the Acting Deputy Permanent Representative of the Australian Mission to the UN in New York. Ms. Polela is currently the Chargé d'Affaires at the Australian Mission to the UN. She's been in this role since June 2020, where she's been covering development, humanitarian and human rights issues. This builds on 4 years' previous experience at the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where she worked on issues of UN political development, human rights and economics. Welcome to our panel, Shilpa. Very welcome.
Thanks so much.
Next, let me introduce you to Professor Dalia Linate, member and former chair of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. In 2012, Dalia was the first person from Eastern European country to be elected to the CEDAW Committee. She is still on the committee and over a 9-year tenure served 2 years as vice chair and a year as the chair. Since 2018, Dalia has been the chair of the CEDAW Committee Working Group on General Recommendation Trafficking in Women and Girls in the Context of Global Migration, and was the rapporteur on the drafting of the CEDAW General Recommendation number 38, Trafficking in Women and Girls in the Context of Global Migration. She also has several books: Adopting and Remembering Soviet Reality, Life Stories of Lithuanian Women, 1945 to 70, The Lithuanian Family in its European Context from 1800 to 1914, and Family and State in Soviet Lithuania. In 2018, Apolitical selected Dalia as one of the most 100 influential people in gender policy in the world. Welcome to our panel, Dalia. Next, I would have been thrilled to introduce Ivana Bartoletti, author and co-founder of Women Leading in AI. But alas, she's been held up by travel disruption. So another member of Women Leading in AI has stepped in, and she's no less impressive, I can tell you, is Alison Gardner. Alison works for the AI Multi-Agency Advisory Service with the National Institute for Care and Health Excellence, addressing cross-regulatory policy for AI in health. She's an experienced educator and is an honorary senior research fellow at Keele University. She founded Women Leading in AI and is the CEO of AI Aware Limited. Alison sits on a number of standards committees, including ISO, IEC, CS42 in UK national, and CEN Senelec JT21 as a For Humanities Fellow. Alison is a renowned speaker in AI ethics with several media appearances, including as a TEDx speaker. And finally, let me introduce you to our very own Tsitsi Matakare. Tsitsi is Equality Now's global lead, ending sexual exploitation. She's a human rights lawyer and leads on Equality Now's program to end sexual exploitation of women and girls online and offline. Tsitsi has a long history of working in women's rights programming, law and policy advocacy, strategic planning, organizational development in the non-profit sector in Africa and across the world. She's a passionate advocate for human rights and sex equality approaches to law and development. So welcome to our panel, Tsitsi. So welcome all four of you to the panel. So let's begin. Let's start with Tsitsi. Tsitsi, Equality Now and Women Leading in AI have come together to campaign for universal digital rights. Maybe you could tell us why you've embarked on this journey towards universal digital rights. What's your vision for this campaign? And what do you want to do? What do you want it to bring about in the long term?
Thank you, Nikki. We are living in a digital age, and as a feminist movement, we can't afford to be absent from discussions and processes that are shaping rights in the digital space. So what we want to see is people's rights fully protected in the digital environment, and not just in some jurisdictions or countries, but for all people across the world, and especially for those whose rights are continually being violated in the digital space. So we're talking about women, girls, and children, including those who face discrimination that's arising from factors such as their race, disability, class, sexual orientation, etc. The internet and digital technology are global, and the violations of rights in this space are also global and multi-jurisdictional. So it follows that the solutions should also be global and multi-jurisdictional. And that's why we are calling for universal digital rights. Over the past few years globally, we've seen an increase in online harm and violence against women and girls. And on the internet, whether it's sexual violence, sex trafficking, sexual extortion, for instance, we see that those forms of violence are flourishing alongside new forms, such as deepfake image abuse, cyber stalking, live streaming of sexual violence, for instance. And at the same time, we also see that artificial intelligence and machine learning are enabled and allowed to amplify these biases that then feed misogyny and racial and religious divisions and so on. And these biases really exacerbate inequality and then feed into this cycle of online harm and violence. And we know that this is not occurring in a vacuum because the internet reflects real life. So the patriarchy that is flourishing in our physical society the world over is then being replicated and exacerbated on the internet. So just, some of what we are seeing in terms of what's happening around gender equality and violence against women and girls online. Equality Now has over 30 years experience of working to end violence and discrimination against women and girls, using the power of the law to bring about systemic change. And Women Leading in AI is an action tank of women leaders in AI who believe that artificial intelligence must be responsible, transparent, held accountable, and governed well. So we really saw an opportunity to bring together our respective organizations' expertise and knowledge and contribute to advocating that the digital space embodies these principles and values of gender equality, of non-discrimination, and that the players in this space can uphold the human rights of everyone, particularly women and girls and other marginalized groups. So our campaign aims to really bring together diverse stakeholders and begin to unpack some of the various aspects of the digital ecosystem and engage with governments and decision makers in the global space on how these issues can be addressed with a feminist intersectional lens, so that the digital world really works for women and girls. And some of these issues are around internet governance, or the role and accountability of the tech sector, the interaction between various rights in this space. So for instance, the right to safety and protection, and other rights such as privacy and freedom of expression, and also looking at the role and impact of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So this is why, the discussion today is really important for us, because it's going to help us to begin to look at the international law and frameworks that we currently have, such as CEDAW and the SDGs, and the extent to which they can begin to address, some of these issues, but also start to see where are some of the gaps and how might we address them through a commitment to universal digital rights. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Siti. This is a huge and very ambitious agenda. And I think this partnership between Equality Now and Women Leading in AI is very exciting. And I hope that by this partnership, we're attractive and attracting to others who may want to join your efforts towards universal digital rights across the world. And I think now we will invite Alison Gardner to speak, so we can get some deeper insight. I know she's stepping in at the last minute, and I really want to thank her for that, because Ivana has been caught up. We're going to ask the question in two parts, Alison. There'll be one question for 4 minutes, and then a second question for another 4 minutes. Artificial intelligence, data and privacy, these are some of the big issues in digital space. What are some of the big debates and disruptions we're facing in the fields of AI, data and privacy online? And what is the impact on people's rights? This is your first questions.
Yes, I'll do my best to step in.
Thank you.
I will jump straight in and talk about the impact on digital rights and people's rights. I worry a lot about how we properly regulate and govern AI and the sort of data privacy online, particularly AI. So within the GDPR, for example, we know that people have the right to challenge if they are solely subject to an algorithmic decision. But my question is always, how do they know in the first place that they have been subject? And even with the sort of very, very diffuse privacy statements and so on that you can get out, your vulnerable person, your person most harmfully impacted by these systems, is not going to be aware. So transparency is really important. Explainability so that people can understand how they've been impacted is also incredibly difficult. And I will just segue in with interpretability and explainability. We can get to the complexities of AI there. And then we have issues of accountability. So even if someone was aware that they have been impacted negatively by an AI system that has been distributed online, who do they go to? Who do they reach out to claim redress if it's an AI system? Because you then end up in this cycle of, well, it's not us, mate, it's the developer, and the developer says, well, it's not, it's where we got the data from, and you go around in this circle. So protecting the rights of the individual and help them navigate the space is really, really important. AI, when it goes live, is not a static tool either. We risk embedding inequality in and hard coding it into all our systems, both offline and online, by using this historical data, but also geographically very specific data. But also we have to remember that AI can change over time. Even static algorithms, the environment in which they're deployed can change us constantly, and that can change the the outputs of the algorithm, because you do get drift in performance there. And of course, we have other types of algorithms that can be continuously learning, and we've seen examples where actually those can be deliberately gamed, and people do that, where they make these systems really worse. It's a difficult environment to navigate. So the impact on people's rights can be really harmful, and I'll just be aware of the timings, but it really was interesting to me on a recent call to look at a standard on risk management for AI. We had to align the standard with various SDGs, and I had to argue quite strongly that we should be considering SDG 5 and gender inequality. And it even with the best will in the world, we're still having to argue this even now. That's fine for me, in that complicated person. But people in the real world impacted by these don't know. But what they can know, what they can understand simply, are their rights. And forget vertical and horizontal legislation. You know, digital stuff can hide away from human rights and equality laws. But if you know your digital rights, you don't need to understand much more than that. And then you can actually stand up and fight for what you think is rightfully yours to be treated correctly. And you can argue that, and it clarifies that for everybody. So I hope that roughly answers. I'm trying not to go too deep into AI models and how to govern them ethically, but it is a real challenge.
And how do you think the adoption of universal digital rights addresses the issues and would prepare us for a digital future?
From a personal perspective, because I spend an awful lot of my time pointing out to people that in the AI world, within digital, regulation, when they're looking at this vertical regulation and they're looking at, we can't do this, this is too difficult, this is technically too difficult, we can't measure or audit AI because of, we have to get the hold of the data and we need the data, and there's issues with that. There's a lot of resistance to that things, and I'm forever pointing out that you have horizontal legislation and rights, such as I said before, equality laws and human rights, and it is these that are it stops people in their tracks and realizing that they're having the resistance has to stop, and you do get backlash within computer science and the technology world to women coming into it. I was interested in what the minister was saying about trying to encourage more women and girls into the field to try and redress that lack of diversity. But actually what you do get when you're there is you do get resistance and backlash and structural bias, and the women are leaving again. And because it's tiring constantly having to argue with that. So universal digital rights for a digital future, for me, would make my arguments a lot easier to make. I can point to these very clearly. I can point individuals impacted by these systems. These are your rights very clearly. There's no wheedling out and saying that the digital is different. There's AI exceptionalism. It doesn't mean that, or this confusion of interpretation that can occur. It is very clearly written down. And key to what Titsi was saying, it's global. Because within the computer science world, within the AI world, we do have, to be truthful, West, white, male dominance in that one, and that fuels the way that the field is being developed and deployed. And we forget the intersectionality, we forget the global aspect of this, and making sure that everybody understands that right. And I just, the global intersectional goal of these, the universal digital rights plan for me is vital, because it's hard to argue when you're right in the midst of all of the standard development and so on and so forth. To do that, I'm often a lone woman voice pointing at, and I'm a white woman, white Western woman, and I have to point out about intersectional issues. So it would help me, but it would help the vulnerable people to know their rights as well.
Thanks. Could you just, I'm going to add another question in there because we've got a little bit of time. Could you tell us a little bit about women leading in AI, and what your ambition is?
Well, Ivana and I co-founded Women Leading in AI, along with another co-founder who has had a very busy life and moved on. She worked for AWS, which is Rima Patel, and she's moved on now. And the reason why we co-founded it was because we were seeing an awful lot of discussion in the AI ethics about policy development. And I noticed, as somebody who worked in computer science and developing AI models, that there was a lot of deliberate, in my view, obfuscation around about AI that was making it difficult to put in policy in place. And then you had a lot of people within policy sort of, enacting ideas and policy, but they didn't quite understand the AI models and was listening. So I remember way back when it was, you can't explain AI, AI is not explainable, it's a black box and all of this gumph. And I was like, well, that is absolutely not true. You might not be able to interpret what the individual model does, but you can explain the whole data science life cycle. So Ivana and I got together. She's a data privacy expert and understands policy. I now work in policy, and myself, who understood AI, and we got together to bridge that gap, but also to amplify the voices of women, because of 51% of the world population, this is the sort of most negatively impacted group in my view. And then when you get to an intersectional aspect of it, it just compounds going on. And we saw that we were risking hard coding inequality in our system. So we had to do something, and we used our links with government, with leading policymakers to try and influence and bring thinkers together and bring women together in a network, because networks work in terms of how we can link in and spread the message and actually have us infiltrate, if you like the word, all the key decision-making bodies. So that's why I'm in all the standards, to make sure they get driven in the right way, and that we can actually hard code the fight for equality and inclusivity and addressing intersectional issues into these systems, so people cannot be resistant and work their way around it, and we don't get ethics washing and diversity washing, which can happen. So and it's taken off mainly because of Ivana's energy, I have to say.
Thank you very much, Alison. That's really useful and very interesting. And as I say, you're as impressive as Ivana when you're talking about your passions for equality in the digital domain. And as you were saying, that people have rights, and these need to be applied both in real life, if you want to call it that, and the digital domain. So I'm going to bring in Dalia Nanata here. Dalia, the Human Rights Council resolution says the promotion and protection and enjoyment of human rights on the internet. They affirm that the same rights that people have online must be protected online. To what extent does CEDAW protect the rights of women and girls in the digital space? And could you talk specifically on how we may leverage CEDAW and the SDGs to address the issues of online sexual exploitation and abuse? We'll focus in on that particular area, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you very much. And hello, everyone. And especially, I want to greet the organizers, and thanks for inviting me to speak on this important issue. And at the same time, as it was said by the moderator, it would be very much important to brief all of us who are here on CEDAW's general recommendation number 38 in relation on what this document, major document on issue of combating trafficking in women and girls, what the document, how it reflects discrimination and violence against women and girls using technologies. United Nations CEDAW General Recommendation number 38 addresses trafficking and exploitation of prostitution in the digital world, embracing the new forms of trafficking that have been developed over the last years. And the recommendation also stresses that sexual exploitation persists due to the state parties' failure to effectively discourage the demand that fosters exploitation and leads to trafficking, and of course, including the demand and clients that operate online. Accordingly, the CEDAW General Recommendation number 38 points that technology has broadened the reach of criminal networks in a way that victims of trafficking with different socioeconomic and geographical backgrounds become more easily reached and recruited. The selection of potential targets online follows some criteria, such as accessibility, vulnerability, and attractiveness. And it is a form of more passive recruitment, far less detectable by law enforcement. It consists in some net phishing, where criminal recruiters search the internet and social media and reply to announcements posted by job seekers who are looking for jobs abroad. Evidence from legal cases demonstrates that sites such as Backpage, Viva Street, and MySpace have already been used for trafficking. It was also reported that Facebook, Twitter, and other social networking sites are susceptible to similar uses. The recruitment process in trafficking and prostitution is often accompanied by a grooming process which aims at gaining the confidence of the potential target. It's a classic. However, with the use of technologies, trafficking does not require criminal networks even to be physically present at the site of exploitation. Marketing, selling, and exploiting of women and girls starts in cyberspace, and it can be over in a cyberspace, or it can start in cyberspace and then be finalized physically, exploiting women and girls. Finally, the financial management of criminal businesses is often done, again, online, even though very few criminal networks have been found operating only with cryptocurrencies. That means criminals still use very classical bank systems, and governments are not doing enough to follow after them. Social media, information and communication technologies are important tools. It has been said from the beginning of this workshop, for women and girls, through which they can express themselves and engage in civic and public life. During the pandemic, the use of technology to perpetrate violence against women and girls, including trafficking, has increased. And now, if digital technology becomes a means to perpetrate violence, victims can be discouraged from having access to the digital world, with the consequences of silencing women and girls. Therefore, any action taken to address the use of digital technology in trafficking must be located within the human rights law framework, as it was mentioned by Tsitsi. From a human rights law perspective, addressing the use of digital technology in trafficking requires the balance between the protection of freedom of expression and the right to privacy on the one hand, and the obligation to prevent attacks on vulnerable people on the other hand. As a consequence, anti-trafficking efforts should be carefully conceived to avoid restrictions of fundamental rights such as privacy, security, and freedom of expression. On the other hand, freedom of expression and the right to privacy must be respected, but cannot be invoked to prevent any action on the internet which might be helpful to track criminal networks and stop their activity. Law enforcement authorities must be empowered to understand technological challenges and the constant development in digital means and practices. Some experts use keywords to explore websites to track trafficking and exploitation of prostitution. Others have extracted telephone numbers. Software tools to extract also have been developed. developed analyzed and visuals. Indicators of human trafficking have been developed too, but they face many challenges just because the constant evolution of digital technology. So awareness raising also has been a very important element of trying to prevent women and girls to become victims of trafficking online. And any action to counter trafficking in women and girls and exploitation of prostitution must include awareness raising among the wider public and specific training for officials and law enforcement authorities as key element. This awareness should be included, according to the CEDAW committee, in, let's say, school curricula. So some good examples can be practiced even involving law framework can be mentioned here. In the European Union strategy against trafficking in persons, the Commission, European Union Commission, in line with the proposal for the Digital Services Act adopted 2022, committed to conduct a dialogue with relevant internet and technology companies to reduce the use of online platforms for the recruitment and exploitation of victims. The Commission will also accompany possible similar dialogues to be conducted by all 27 member states at national level. Also, much is done actually in the US, which is not part of the CEDAW convention. However, the main question here is, we can produce a lot of excellent regional, national, and international documents regarding how to prevent discrimination and violence against women and girls online. The main question lies how to force the governments be responsible to combat this evil. So here you need not only perfect international legal framework and documents, you need a mechanism to deal with the state parties. So CEDAW this is such a mechanism itself. And if, let's say, 10 years ago, when I joined the committee in 2012, 2013, there only occasionally CEDAW's expert would raise during the constructive dialogues issues related to climate change and its impact on gender and women's girls, very rarely, only selectively. Now it became a classical questions during all, without any exception, constructive dialogues with all state parties. So right now, only occasionally during constructive dialogues, CEDAW committee raises the issue of violence against women and girls using digital technologies, very rarely. But from now on, after this post-COVID era, I think it should become just part of our dialogues with each state party. And only then, as Cici said, and when Amanda also mentioned, we will push and we will force all governments, 189 in CEDAW, in the case of CEDAW committee, to be responsible and to start acting. So thank you.
Thank you. And how do you think the law international standards can address some of the issues raised by Alison's? So things like hardwired biases in the digital space. Well, how do you think we can call on international standards to help us with that?
Yeah, maybe I stayed in CEDAW committee for too long, because for me, any document is meaning like I am not a lawyer. first of all. I'm a historian. So, but any document, even the one that I led to develop, General Recommendation 38, it's just the document. Whatever excellent from the legal point of view, you need a mechanism to adopt. You need document, you need the mechanism, and you need state parties involved, all 203. So, I do not see the value in analyzing documents without those two elements.
Excellent. So in the end, the responsibility for the domestication and the implementation of international law, these standards, they sit with national governments. So let's move on to someone who's working with the national government. So the role of government, national and collective, in protecting the rights of women and girls online and achieving equality in the digital space can't be underestimated. Shilpa, what actions or initiatives is the government of Australia taking to achieve gender equality and address violence against women and girls online?
Thanks so much, Nikki, for the kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's lovely to kick off the HLPF fortnight with such an interesting and timely discussion. So thanks again to Equality Now and Women Leading in Artificial Intelligence for organising this event. To your question, Nikki, I'd say this is even more relevant now than ever before. As others have noted before me, the COVID pandemic forced us all to spend more and more time online, but more time online has brought even greater risk to women and girls. And digital technology is unfortunately now linked to new and emerging forms of violence against women and girls. Tsitsi mentioned some of these already, but things like online assault, sexual harassment, stalking, and non-consensual sharing of intimate images. And Dalia had mentioned, for instance, the alarming increase in trafficking during the pandemic. Another example that we saw in Australia was an alarming increase in reports of child sexual abuse. Reports were made to our e-safety commissioner, and there was a 200% increase in March and April 2020 alone. So in terms of what governments can do, in Australia, we consider the safety of women and girls, both online and offline, is a national priority. And our response to technology facilitated abuse combines education and awareness, survivor support, funding, and legislation as well. We're really proud to have created the world's first government agency that's solely dedicated to tackling online abuse and keeping citizens safer online. So that's the e-safety commissioner that I mentioned before. She has the power to take action against websites, hosting providers, social media services, and perpetrators as well. So for instance, if someone posts or threatens to post an intimate image of a person online without consent, they can face civil penalties in Australia. It's clear, though, that online abuse of women and girls is a global human rights issue. It spans jurisdictions, given the ubiquitous nature of the internet, and therefore individual governments can't tackle it alone. I think really we need a coordinated global response that harnesses the collective efforts of the international community, international organisations, regional institutions, and the technology sector as well. So one example of where we have been trying to do this stems from March 2020. Australia, the UK, the US, New Zealand, and Canada launched what was called the voluntary principles to counter online child sexual exploitation and abuse. And these principles were developed in partnership with digital industry, including Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, as well as NGOs, academia, and others. And the principles provide a best practice framework that tries to guide online platforms and service providers on how they can address the risk of online child sexual abuse. Australia is also working closely with partners in our region to integrate gender equality and women's empowerment in cyber and critical technology cooperation. So just a couple of examples of projects that we're doing in this space. There's one called ABC ID's Girls Online project, and this one empowers young women and girls in Tonga and Vanuatu to participate meaningfully but also safely online. And also one by our own e-safety commissioner called the Safety by Design project. And this one's working with Indo-Pacific region governments community and industry stakeholders as well. And it provides information and training that's designed to address violence against women and girls online and promote their full participation in public life. So those are just a couple of examples of the initiatives that we're taking forward at the national, regional and international level. But I absolutely agree, it is an area that governments need to get involved in and show leadership in. And I'd be happy to provide further information if any of those initiatives are of more interest to those listening.
Thank you. And how might governments work together to ensure universal digital rights for all? And what are the opportunities to build multilateral consensus on digital rights, do you think?
So I would say Australia would argue that our starting point should be that international law applies online just as it does offline, and that this should include international human rights law. All UN member states have endorsed 11 norms on responsible state behaviour in cyberspace, and I think 3 of those are particularly relevant to our discussion today. So the first of those is that states should respect the promotion, protection and enjoyment of human rights on the internet. Secondly, that they should respect the right to privacy in the digital age. And finally, that states should guarantee full respect for human rights, including the right to freedom of expression. And so I think this last one in particular can contribute to combating discrimination and narrowing the digital divide for women and girls. We would consider that international human rights law needs to be part of all multilateral discussions on these issues. So this would include in the Human Rights Council, the Commission on the Status of Women, in cyber forums, CEDAW, wherever these issues are being discussed. And it's really important that when we're discussing them, that we attract and engage diverse voices to be part of those discussions. I think bringing in a broad range of perspectives is the best way to both promote and protect human rights, but also to mitigate any adverse impacts of policies on women and girls. I think, policies need to be sense tested, and the best way to do that is through testing them in a diverse way. Beyond multilateral discussions themselves, I think the UN mechanisms, such as the treaty bodies and special procedures, also have a critical role to play, and Dalia expanded on that in her discussion before. I would say the treaty bodies have carved out a really important role in the broader UN human rights architecture, and evidence shows that the treaty system has had an enormous impact on the protection of human rights on the ground, particularly when treaty norms are incorporated into domestic law. So to give just a couple of examples again, there was the so-called general comment by the Committee on the Rights of the Child on the digital environment, and CEDAW's recommendations on digital technologies and trafficking of women and girls. I'd also say events like today are another piece of the puzzle, because they create opportunities for us to share lessons learned from experience at home. We can talk about what best practice national legislation looks like, and also how to be more joined up going forward. So I'd argue that there are many opportunities to build multilateral consensus on universal digital rights. There's these discussions taking place across the UN, there's the treaty body mechanisms and their signalling effect, and then the discussions amongst member states, NGOs, practitioners, anyone with an interest in this space. What's clear is that the abuse of women and girls online has many impacts, both immediate and long term, and it's a significant barrier to gender equality and participation in all aspects of life. So there are clear roles that we can and all should play to address the underlying causes of that abuse, and we, Australia, look forward to working with everyone to do so. I might leave it there.
Great, that's a great, was that an invitation to collaborate there? So as we've heard, there are both opportunities to be leveraged and gaps to be addressed in the international law, states' responsibility at the national level, and the need for a multilateral consensus at the intranational level in order to secure digital rights secure our rights in the digital world, in terms of safety, in terms of freedom, in terms of privacy, data sovereignty, rights to privacy, and protection from abuse. Let's find out what our participants are saying. Amanda, what's been happening in the chat?
We have quite a few questions in the chat, and I will start with a question that has been directed at Dalia. It's coming from Gillian, and she would like to know, what concrete implementation measures can individual member states take to protect an individual's freedoms and protect one's privacy online?
Dahlia, I think that one's for you.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question, but I think as we all discussed here, national governments, they should encourage to channel all relevant international legal frameworks to their national laws. That is the first, I think, task to do for them. And then by pushing from, if we are speaking about women and girls, then by pushing from the CEDAW committee in the form of constructive dialogues, then concluding observations and recommendations, and with the help with the local, national civil society, then the governments will start implement the laws that are the best for them. That is the mechanism. So and all international principles, what must be reflected in their national laws can be found at least in our General Recommendation 38 or CEDAW Convention and other relevant regional maybe documents. But as I said, first is legal framework, and then we all together stress it that this is civil society, international mechanism that should work together in order to implement national laws. And I mixed up the names, Alison, excuse me, it was, I had Alison in mind. Yes, thank you.
No worries. What else do we have, Amanda?
Alison has her hand up. Do you want to quickly jump to her?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because this mechanism is really, really important. We can have high level principles, but how you enact it, and there's real challenges with AI and data privacy. So you just imagine, for example, of you looking to get a loan, and it could be an AI system that is deployed in one locality in the US, for example. They may want to get round GDPR rules by having a human in the loop decision maker based within the EU, but the customer might be based, for example, in the UK, and there is an inequitable, unfair or discriminatory decision made by that person sat in the UK. What laws do they revert to? Who do they approach? And trying to intersect all of those complexities, and then of course you've got the data flow through, is a real challenge. So mechanisms are really, really important, and this is why I will go back to the idea of international standards. If they could, and we can't, but if they could be mandated, if you're going to do this, you are held by this bound. But agreeing where accountability lies is really important. I'm very interested in the e-safety commissioner that was mentioned by Shilpa, because again, although that is post-harm, that is somebody going, I've been harmed by this. So it's this proactive, preventative measures, and then these measures that are enabled to support individuals who have experienced harm coming together. So mechanisms is the real thing to speak to. So I'm pleased Dahlia mentioned those.
Yeah.
Yes, Dahlia, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, without this mechanism, it cannot be done anything. Just it will not work. We will stay on the level of discussions. And traffickers, whatever, online or offline, they just wait for this, just for discussions, for workshops, discussion, they're doing nothing. So, but the question that Amanda brought to us, it's very much important. So we answered this, the most constructive, the most crucial part. But if we start talking practically, it's the demand side. The governments should start addressing the demand side, not only for sexual purposes, of course, for sexual purposes, to address the demand side, the clientele is the most important thing, but also the demand side for organ removals. For example, when we had, especially it's obvious when we have dialogues with so-called old democracies, and you have a very economically rich, let's say, European country, and they have advanced laws regarding the demand side. Sometimes they even have laws combating the demand side for combating for sexual purposes, the clients, protecting women, but fighting clients. But so it's addressing the demand side, everything is correct, but they do not have the law in their own aging society addressing the demand side for organ removals. And they know that in their advanced clinics, they implant organs from trafficked persons, but they do not have such laws regarding this side of demand. So this demand side, and I'm very happy that another very powerful international organization like OSCE, they also started talking very powerfully on requests addressing the demand side. So the rest, I would say, state parties or some, especially United Nations specialized agencies, they are reluctant, just to say the least, to address the demand side, especially for sexual exploitation. So the demand side, civil society should push their governments to implement high-level international legal standards in their own national legislations. But first of all, they should check what laws they have addressing the demand side. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll ask Tsitsi a question, just to segue a little bit. We've had quite a bit of this discussion about some of the initiatives that are happening at the moment and some of the work that needs to happen going forward. But Tsitsi Matekela, how do we ensure that we do not only respond to global north challenges and human rights infringements, but ensure that all people's interests are protected?
Thanks, Amanda. I think some of it, the other panelists have already alluded to how maybe we can have more inclusive processes. So, others were talking about ensuring in these discussions and in the formulation of solutions, sort of involving a wide range of perspectives. So bringing, together voices and perspectives from different regions. I think the idea as well of involvement of all governments, so whether the governments are in the north or south or, wherever, that it becomes a collective, inclusive process that all governments can be part of. For our campaign as well, we are really wanting to bring in and join, hands with people from all over the world, different experiences, so that whatever we come up with is able to address the needs of people in different contexts. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tsitsi. And the next question, could I ask Shilpa, please? It is in the Q&A, and it is coming from Lisa. It says, very interesting with the e-safety commissioner. What is it exactly? A government office, or is it under a ministry?
Thanks so much, Amanda. So the e-safety commissioner is an independent statutory office. So it sits under our Ministry of Communications, but it is an independent body. It's supported by our Australian Communications and Media Authority, and it's headed, as I mentioned, by the e-safety commissioner herself, who's Julie Imam Grant at the moment. So it's been in existence for sort of probably 4 or 5 years at this point, and it's governed by something called the Online Safety Act. This act has been amended a number of times, but the most recent amendment in 2021 actually gave the eSafety Commissioner quite substantial new powers to protect Australians across all online platforms. So for instance, the Act now means that the eSafety Commissioner can compel online service providers to remove seriously harmful content within 24 hours of receiving a formal notice. It requires industry to now develop new codes to regulate illegal and restricted content. And eSafety is also working with the tech industry to develop these codes and guide online service providers about how they can comply with their obligations under the Act. So there's a really interesting range of activities that the eSafety Office is involved in. I saw a question in the chat as well about wanting more information on the various projects that I mentioned. I'm mindful of time, so perhaps I might ask my colleague Madeline, who's online, to provide that information to the organisers, and you can send it out in slower time.
Thank you so much, Jota, for that. Alison, I will ask you a question. Please answer quite briefly because of time. There's a question in the chat and it's in Spanish, so I will try my best to translate it to English. But how do we encourage women to study careers associated with science and to technology? And Alison, could you just please point to whether Women Leading in AI is doing any work to encourage women's careers associated with AI and technology?
Again, it's just about this influencing. It is really hard to do that. I think to encourage women in there, we have to change the culture. We have to acknowledge that this is a subject that has been engineered to be preferred by males, even within its actual semantics of there. So it needs re-engineering. I think when you're building curricula, you have to make sure you build it with a diverse group of people. So I was involved, for example, in the UK with the computer science guidelines for bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, where we built in an auditable framework for making sure your curriculum is diverse and inclusive. It is a challenge. These have been happening for decades and they haven't solved it yet. And it really, I think, is we need to start dismantling it, the subject a lot more and rebuilding it to make sure it remains diverse and inclusive. And because you get that resistance. And again, going back, sorry, Dahlia, but this idea of the flip side of the coin, is educating the people who are resistant to this and educating, people not to, for example, there's another question, sexually abuse, and getting that side of it, and mainly the male, violence, the perpetrators of that. So it's a twofold response. A lot of the spotlight is always on women and what women should be doing and how we should be doing it. And actually we need to convert that spotlight into someone else. So there isn't an easy answer, but I will say, whenever you are building a new team in a tech environment, you have to make sure it is diverse from the very outset, because that will stop you from building a biased culture. And then make sure that your culture is there. So you have to do it right from the beginning. So it is very difficult to answer. And there is another question, which I don't think was for me, Amanda, which is about how you educate for sexual abuse online.
It is for you, Alison.
Okay, right. I used to be a teacher many years ago. In secondary schools, and I know how this is extremely really difficult. There's different tools, education for protection. There's a great organisation by Shea Akiwowu called Glitch, who trains you on the skills to protect yourself online, which is really a useful thing to do. And I'm sure there are other equal courses as to understand about your privacy. But again, it comes back down to understand your rights, that you don't have to do these things, but there are technological tools that we can help protect it. So people go against, for example, face recognition or face analysis, but age determination tools, so that you don't get people going into forums that are inappropriate for them. And using technological approaches can also help this very proactive way. So tech isn't always bad, digital isn't always bad. We can actually use the power of that to help defend. But again, it's the flip side of it is we have to not just educate the girls not to be abused, we have to educate the boys not to abuse and understand the difference. And that side of the conversation should happen as well. It doesn't always happen enough.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Nikki, over to you. We've responded to all of the questions from the panelists.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up question for Alison, really, on that one. If we're talking about, you know, hardwired biases and the way that algorithms can feed misogyny and escalate, you know, biases and misogyny online, what do you think, Alison, are some of the approaches to addressing that?
Some of the processes to addressing,
some of the approaches to addressing sort of the hardwiring of biases and, you know, the sort of escalation of misogyny online, because things are amplified by
and nudging algorithms that can modify behavior, and you end up going into a rabbit hole. And we know, for example, that there's been some horrible examples of people looking at diets, and then they go down into things, and you know, they're depressed, and they get encouraged towards suicide sites and so on and so forth, and that has to have hard legislation. But the tech companies have to have some accountability here. You know when you're developing a nudging algorithm that you can do that. I think it was I'm not sure if I should have named them, but and it might have changed. But Netflix, for example, had a recommendation algorithm, which, you know, you can end up just going and watching the same films all the time, and it augments and goes down there. But they can build in this, we'll just throw in a few out there ones, you know, so that you to try and make sure that you do not become so narrow in your viewpoint. And this happens with political forums as well. Then they get more and more right wing, more and more violent. You can design algorithms to prevent that from happening. The fact that they don't is because it encourages that type of, you know, the financial structure that they go to model that they're going to try and get that one. So this is where we do have to start regulating the technology and the big tech companies against that, and they have to have accountability. Ethics guidelines, and this is what we're doing, is not enough. And these big corporations flood the standards organizations to try and have influence and guide them in, slightly, so that they protect their own interests. But you don't have to design technology to do these faults. We are aware enough now about it. And I will just add that bias is not just within the data, it is in how you develop these models from beginning to end, from business use case all the way through to decommissioning. Human decision making is involved in every step, and then all of the cognitive biases that can involved in there, and understanding that and having the right ethics, governance and guidelines and accountability with AI audits, for example, will help address that and drive that in. Otherwise, you're going to have to start hitting people in their pockets, because they won't follow things through completely as they should. But don't ever fall foul that they say they can't do a technological solution to something. Trust me, they can. Regulation does not inhibit innovation. You put the regulation in to make them do it, and they'll innovate their hearts out to develop a technological solution to something. They really will.
That's a great sentence to end on there. So we've heard from, global networks such as Women Leading in AI. We've heard from national governments like Australia. We've heard from national governments working at the UN. And we're looking at the national governments in Finland who are making great progress. And we're looking at things like CEDAW, mechanisms such as CEDAW. There's real opportunities there. So we have opportunities, up and down, if you want to go up and down, vertically up and down, from the national to the international to the UN, talking to each other about how we can take this stuff forward and how we can move towards universal digital rights. And I wondered, Amanda, if you could maybe wrap up this session for us, and then I'll just give a quick thanks at the end.
Perfect. We hope that this event has given you some insights into some of the issues and challenges around digital rights, particularly for women and girls. The challenges and, of course, the opportunities that we currently have. Opportunities, there are opportunities in existing frameworks, and the minds and efforts of people that have shared their thinking with us today, including Minister Lee Anderson, Shilpa, Dalia, Alison Gardner, and our very own Tsitsi, who are working in their different roles and capacities to make sure that we have a better and safer, not just physical world, but digital world for women and girls. These cross-sector conversations are important in bringing the range of perspective and expertise as well as thinking that is required to move the agenda forward. The session today has laid bare that for our generations and future ones to come, we urgently need to lay the foundations for an inclusive digital economy and society for all. We need to focus our energies on building and implementing frameworks at the global level that will enable all of us to use digital technology to build better lives and a more equal, peaceful, and trusting world, and live up to the SDGs to leave no person behind. We will be guided by the principles of gender equality, non-discrimination, and freedom from violence in SDG Goal 5, as well as the accountability articulated in other SDGs. As we have heard today, we have existing frameworks that we can maximize on, and these frameworks need to fully recognize the fast evolving nature of the technology as well as to future-proof it. Our campaign that Equality Now and Women Leading in AI have requires that we work together with others, so different stakeholders working together. And in the next phase of our campaign, we are envisaging a coming together of different actors in a campaign network where more minds come together to move this agenda forward. Please reach out to us. We'll put our contact details in the chat and we will share with you as well in an email after this session. So please contact us and be part of the journey. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you, Amanda. And Amanda Manyami is our digital rights and law expert in Equality Now. I didn't introduce you. Sorry, Amanda, you popped up doing the questions and answers, but just say who she is. So thank you, Amanda, for doing that. Thank you, Tsitsi. And she can be contacted through Equality Now if you need further information, either Tsitsi or Amanda. A huge thank you to Her Excellency Lee Anderson from the Finnish government for opening this event, and our other panelists, Shilpa Pulela from the Australian Mission to the UN, Professor Dalia Linata from the CEDAW Committee, and Alison Gardner from Women Leading in AI. It's been a really interesting conversation. I hope it's encouraged you to reach out to us and be part of our campaign for universal digital rights. And just to close by saying thank you very much to all of those behind the scene, Tara, Catherine and Shruti, who are busy pressing buttons and making sure all the technology works right for us, and tweeting and letting people know what we're talking about. So thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.